Magis mori quam peccare, to die rather than to sin. Magis mori quam peccare, to die rather than to sin. This Christian maxim inspired the martyrs of Uganda, canonized by the Church in 1964. These martyrs had been prepared for the supreme sacrifice of martyrdom for our holy Catholic faith by Father Lourdel, the Apostle of Uganda. Simeon Lourdel was born in Dury, in Pas-de-Calais, France, on December 20th, 1853. His father was a farmer. His mother, gentle yet energetic, was graced with great faith. The couple would have 5 sons. Vigorous and exuberant, Simeon was not enthusiastic about his studies at the minor seminary. Resistant to discipline, he chose the company of the most uncooperative students and preferred working in the fields to homework. He fervently read stories, however, about faraway missions and was attracted by the example of missionaries. But the administrators of the minor seminary doubted his vocation. When Simeon arrived 2 months late, 2 months late for the start of the 1870-1871 school year, having been helping his father with the harvest, he was unceremoniously sent home. Arriving home in tears, the young man exclaimed, "I want to be a priest. They told me I didn't have a vocation. Well, I will prove them wrong." He began to apply himself seriously to his studies, and in October 1872 entered the major seminary in Arras. During his time as a student of philosophy, he began contemplating joining the new Society of African Missionaries, the White Fathers, they were called, just founded by Archbishop Lavigieri of Algiers. And at the start of the February 1874, he was admitted to its novitiate near Algiers. On February 2nd, 1875, Simeon became a member, taking vows with the White Fathers, and was ordained to the priesthood on April 2nd, 1877. In 1878, Archbishop Lavigieri organized a caravan to take 10 missionaries, including Father Lourdel, to Central Africa. They left at the end of April. Some explorers, such as Livingstone and Stanley, had proven that the hardships of the journey could be survived. This was no picnic. Torrential rains, blazing sun, lack of drinkable water, fevers and other diseases, attacks on the caravan, desertions among the porters, forced marches through scorching deserts or swampy marshes, encounters with caravans of chained slaves, including women and many children. Yet at the end of December 1878, the missionaries arrived at the southern tip of the immense Lake Victoria, which they prepared to cross to reach Uganda. Green hills, cool valleys, and luxuriant vegetation made Uganda a very beautiful country. Its inhabitants, the Baganda, lived in huts made of branches. Their crafts are varied: ironwork, pottery, textiles, baskets, mats, and musical instruments. The country was governed by a king with absolute power. He had a great number of pages recruited from among his officers' children. Polygamy, slavery, and vices were common. Nevertheless, the people were notable for their dignified and polite manner. Respectful of authority and brave, the Baganda were faithful subjects and fearless warriors. The false god of the Baganda, Katonda, was worshipped amid other gods of a pantheon, whom the sorcerers claimed to represent. The Baganda believed that man did not die entirely at death, but that a spirit was freed from his body and could come back in an animal or another human, reincarnation. And when Islam was introduced into the country in 1852 by merchant caravans, It had undermined the pagan religion in the minds of the elite. In 1875, the English explorer Stanley arrived, followed 2 years later by Anglican missionaries. One of them, Mr. Mackay, settled in Rubaga, the capital, in 1879. Although the religion of Uganda maintained an important role in society, the essential factor for social cohesion was the king, the Kabaka. The best among the king's subjects were not sure, though, about the human sacrifices, arbitrary executions, and polygamy allowed or even demanded by their country's religion, whether they were correct. Obviously, they're against the natural law. They could feel it. From this point of view, they were open to Christianity. When the White Fathers arrived, the king of the Baganda was a man named Mutesa. Elegant, proud, and powerful, he was authoritarian and hot-tempered, intelligent and cunning. He quickly understood that the arriving Europeans, English, Belgians, French, and Germans, would surely compete amongst themselves, and this would allow him to play off their rivalries and negotiate with the highest bidder. In February 1879, the arrival of Father Lordel and the brother who accompanied him caused great commotion in Mutesa's court. However, the king ended up giving them a warm welcome. He gave them lodgings close to the capital and put them under close surveillance. Hearing the brother who accompanied Father Lordel call him mon père, my father, the Baganda took this for his name, and from then on called him mon père. The White Fathers concerned themselves with material development as well as evangelization. Many Baganda came to them for various reasons, but at first, none offered a serious hope of conversion. On the other hand, the Prime Minister observed with great displeasure the influence exercised by the Fathers, who applied themselves to buying back as many children as possible from the Arab slave traders, receiving them in an orphanage and teaching them to true faith. Father Lordel was to leave a profound mark on Uganda. He spoke with the people in a pleasant manner and, armed with his doctor's bag, gave first aid with a success that ensured him a solid reputation. People were astonished by his courteous manners. One did not expect such cordiality from a man considered to be superior. One day, King Mutesa announced his desire to become Catholic. Father Lordel replied that he would first have to renounce polygamy, which the king refused to do. In 1881, Arab slave traders, whose evil business was hampered by the missionaries' presence, persuaded Mutesa, the king, to declare Islam the national religion. But Father Lordel managed to foil this plan. Many Baganda had embraced Catholicism after having tried Islam or Protestantism, and often both, in that order. They had observed the Fathers at length and carefully listened to their doctrine, and then they decided freely. They made excellent catechists too. Christianity would have spread much more quickly if the leaders had not prevented their servants from learning the religion, and if the missionaries had been able to move freely within the country. Well, other Baganda came to the Fathers with sometimes mixed motives, but with the help of grace, their convictions deepened. Following Archbishop Lavigiere's directives, the missionaries only baptized those who had persevered for at least 4 years in the catechumenate. The slave traders and the rulers, furious at Maupere's, that is Father Lordel's, growing influence, vowed a mortal hatred to the Fathers. For his part, Father Lordel saw polygamy practiced by the rich and depriving poor villagers of wives as a cause of the rampant sodomy and sodomitical lifestyle that was going on. The king himself gave himself over to evils of Sodom and Gomorrah, including abusing children. Martyrs was taught his catechumens that to give in to the king's desires in this way was condemned by God. Taking a firm position against the king's lusts exposed them to his anger and to death. But these young Christians did not hesitate to refuse to give themselves to the king. They soon formed a group of serious youth, truly committed to putting their daily conduct in line with the teaching they had received, while at the same time serving the king devotedly. But at the end of 1882, the king's hesitation in the matter of religion and his fear of European powers, for whom the White Fathers were considered emissaries, gave rise to a real danger to the Fathers. They decided to leave the mission for a while. On November 20th, they set sail for the south of Lake Victoria, leaving behind 20 baptized and more than 440 catechumens. In their absence, the Christians organized themselves under the leadership of the catechists, who were mostly between the ages of 20 and 30. On October 10th, 1884, Mutesa died, surrounded by Muslims and the Quran on his chest. His son Mwanga was chosen to succeed him. Friendly, curious, and likable, Mwanga had often visited the Fathers and had demonstrated a great deal of trust in and affection for Father Lordell. Before leaving, the priest had told him, "As soon as you are king, we will see each other again." Joseph Mukasa, who had become Mwanga's nurse after having been devoted to Mutesa, told the king one day, "My lord and king, Mapera was your friend." "That's true," replied the king. "Don't you want him to come back? The medicines he gave your father were good." "That is true. Write him to come back." In mid-July 1885, the Fathers returned. They saw that the church had grown. The number of Christians had more than doubled. Father Lordell wrote, "Mwanga is well disposed towards us. He will leave us, I believe, complete freedom to teach, but for himself he will have trouble practicing. He has renounced all the local superstitions. He has the misfortune to smoke hemp, which will leave him dull-witted in a few years. Many of our neophytes have a great influence over him and do him much good with their advice." However, Mwanga was prone to sudden about-faces. Like his father, he showed a tendency toward the practices of Sodom and Gomorrah. A fervent Christian, Joseph Mukasa, whose ambition was to live according to Christ's teachings, tried to turn the king away from lust, drugs, and idolatry. He did not hesitate to remove from the palace the young pages under his care when the king solicited them for impure acts. "When the king solicits you," he said, "for something bad, refuse him." This attitude irritated Mwanga, but Joseph exhorted him, "My lord the king, I beg you, do not do this anymore. God hates impurity." St. Paul, in fact, condemned lust as a vice particularly unworthy of a Christian, and which excludes one from the kingdom of heaven. Thus he wrote to the Corinthians, "Do not be deceived, neither the immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals will enter into the kingdom of God." Mwanga always liked Joseph, but when he dared to demand that the king change his lifestyle, the king forgot their long friendship. After striking Joseph with a spear, Mwanga ordered him killed. When the executioners tried to tie Joseph's hands, he told them, "A Christian who gives his life for God is not afraid to die." He forgave Mwanga with all his heart, but made one final plea for his repentance before he was beheaded and then burned on November 15, 1885. Now, Charles de Luanga took over the instruction and leadership of the Christian community at court. and the charge of keeping the young boys and men out of the king's hands. Perhaps Joseph's plea for repentance had some effect on Mwanga because the persecution died down for 6 months. Anger and suspicion must have been simmering in Mwanga, however. In May 1886, he called one of his pages named Mwafu and asked him what the page had been doing that kept him away from Mwanga. When the page replied that he had been receiving religious instructions from Dennis, one of the other pages or one of the catechists, the king's temper boiled over. And he had Dennis brought to him and killed him himself by thrusting a spear through his throat. He then ordered that the royal compound be sealed and guarded so that no one could escape. And he summoned the country's executioners. Knowing what was coming, Charles baptized 4 catechumens that night, including a 13-year-old Kizito. The next morning, Mwanga brought his whole court before him and separated the Christians from the rest by saying, "Those who do not pray, stand by me. Those who do pray, stand over there." He demanded the separation of the 15 boys and young men, all under 25, if they were Christians and intended to remain Christians. When they answered yes with strength and courage, the king condemned them to death. He commanded that the group be taken on a 37-mile trek to the place of execution in Namugongo. The chief executioner begged one of those boys, his own son, Mabaga, to escape and hide, but Mabaga refused. The cruelly bound prisoners passed the home of the White Fathers on their way to execution. Father Lordell remembered 13-year-old Kizito, laughing and chattering. Lordell almost fainted at the courage and the joy these condemned converts, his friends, his children, displayed on their way to martyrdom. 3 of these faithful servants of Christ were killed on the road. A Christian soldier named James Buzabubilabo was brought before the king, but Mwanga ordered him to be killed with the rest. James said, "Goodbye then. I'm going to heaven, and I will pray to God for you." When a grief-stricken Father Lordell raised his hand in absolution as James passed, James lifted up his own tied hands and pointed up to show that he knew he was going to heaven and would meet Father Lordell there. With a smile, he said to Lordell, "Why are you so sad? This is nothing to the joys you have taught us to look forward to." Also condemned were Andrew Kagwa, a Kigowa chief, who had converted his wife and several others, and Matthias Burumba, an assistant judge. The chief counselor was so furious with Andrew that he proclaimed he wouldn't eat until he knew Andrew was dead. When the executioners hesitated, Andrew egged them on, saying, "Don't keep your counselor hungry, kill me." When the same counselor described what he was going to do with Matthias, he added, "No doubt his God will rescue him." "Yes," Matthias replied, "God will rescue me, but you will not see how he does it, because he will take my soul and leave you only my body." Matthias was cut up on the road and left to die some 3 days later. The original caravan reached Namugongo, and the survivors were kept in prison for 7 days. On June 3rd, they were brought out, wrapped in reed mats, and placed on a pyre. Mabaga was killed first by order of his father, the chief executioner, who had tried one last time to change his son's mind. The rest were burned to death. They died calling on the name of Jesus and proclaiming, "You can burn our bodies, but you cannot harm our souls." The Christians were filled with joy. "One would think that they were going to their wedding," exclaimed the stupefied executioners. Spontaneously, the martyrs recited the Our Father. The executioners listened, taken aback. When the martyrs came to the words, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us," the executioners were seized with terror. and screamed with all their might, "It is not we who are killing you. It is our gods who are killing you because you call them demons." A special fate was reserved for Charles de Luanga. After having witnessed the other Christian martyrdoms, he was led to a stake set up for him. While the fire devoured his body, the executioners shouted to him, "Go ahead, have God come and pull you out from this fire." He replied, "What you call fire is nothing but cold water. As for you, take care that the God you are insulting does not plunge you one day in the true fire that does not go out." When the White Fathers were expelled from the country, the new Christians carried on their work, translating and printing the catechism in their native language, and giving secret instruction on the faith. Without priests, without the Mass, and the sacraments, with only the faith, the intelligence and courage and wisdom these converts possessed, they kept the Catholic Church alive and growing in Uganda. When the White Fathers returned after King Mwanga's death, they found 500 Christians and 1,000 catechumens waiting for them. Father Lordell thought 4 main reasons enraged the king against the Christians. First, he said, the fear that the missionaries, after having taught the people, would take over the country. They were worried about outside takeover. Number 2, the observation that his slaves knew more about the faith than he did. And number 3, his page's refusal after having been taught religion to go along with his vices. And we know these vices unleash much anger as well as criminal and murderous passions. And number 4, the fear he and many of the leaders of the country shared in seeing worship of the true God take place of the worship of pagan deities. But the bloody persecution, rather than slowing down the conversions, only increased them. In the months that followed, the king's rage subsided, but he remained suspicious of the White Fathers and all Europeans. On June 22nd, 1934, Pope Pius XI declared Charles de Luanga patron of African youth. About 100 Christians received the grace of martyrdom between 1885 and 1887. In 1964, Pope Paul VI canonized 22 of these Catholics, for whom there is accurate documentation. Charles de Luanga being among them, obviously. At the time of Father Lordell's death on May 11th, 1890, the mission in Uganda numbered close to 2,200 baptized and about 10,000 fervent catechumens. Soon the seminaries, novitiates, and schools for the catechist that Father Lordell had prayed for began to spring up. In 1911, Catholics made up 30% of the population in Uganda. Christianity had become the main religion by then. Its custom and practices became the customs of the Baganda. As for King Mwanga, he was exiled to the Seychelles Islands, where he died in obscurity in 1903 after having finally been baptized by the Anglicans. May Holy Mary and all the saints plead for us with the Lord, that we may obtain grace and salvation from him who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.